what a great day yesterday. Hope you all enjoyed yourselves. It was a very action-packed day and lots to see and do. It's a very impressive event, this one. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And we're going to have a panel session this morning and have some questions and have a bit of a discussion about why regenerative agriculture, with a little bit of linking some of the science around the principles and the practice, and some of the social sciences around the mindsets and some of that other parts of that discussion on the regenerative journey. My name is Joel Williams, and I'll be chairing the panel. I'm going to open with a small presentation just to set the stage, set the scene, and then we'll hear from our other panel members here, which I'll introduce as we come to them. So let's dive into it. I'm going to start with a little bit around the why and the science of the principles and the practice, and then we'll go from there. So, of course, why? Well, in terms of these broader topics of soil health and planetary health, we have, of course, a lot of issues we have faced with the advancement and the intensification of agriculture in the last decades. It has come with many positives in terms of output, productivity in that post-World War II era, where that was the right policy prescription to increase production and do that at scale, efficiently, etc. But of course, that has come at a double-edged sword. It has come with various hidden costs, and we have seen various environmental degradations through time. Many of you may have seen this image before, this concept of planetary health and planetary boundaries, and that there are certain areas that we have been exceeding the capacity of the planet to support the systems here. So things like, for example, big topic, of course, is climate change and biodiversity loss. This is a big alarm bell. We have increased nutrients in our environment, particularly around nitrogen and phosphorus, and also issues around novel entities. This is referring to pollutants, plastics, these types of things. So we are reaching this point of, in certain areas, exceeding the planet's capacity to deal with those impacts. And many of these are coming from agriculture. Not all, of course, but agriculture is also indeed a piece of that puzzle. So that's one hand, and in the discussion of then soils more specifically and soil health, we have this also issue of soil degradation. Some of the numbers and the figures here are somewhat alarming. We hear this figure of 1/3 or so of the world's soils are degraded, 24 odd billion tons of soil lost every year. You know, exactly whatever these figures are, it'll be different, of course, in different areas, different parts of the world, different contexts, but nonetheless, there is some alarm bells ringing in relation to soil degradation and soil decline. 98+% of our calories come from the soil. We rely on soil for our nutrition, for our energy, and for many other things, fiber, fuel, energy, many other provisions. And so this issue of soil decline and soil degradation is alarming. Now, okay, that figure of 1/3 or so of the world's soils being degraded is nuanced. It depends on what type of soil degradation we're talking about. And so it's not just in the arid areas that you might kind of, like in this image is kind of suggesting here. It's not just in some of those arid areas. We also have things that would be, for example, more relevant here in a UK context of soil structural decline, so soil compaction. This is also a type of soil degradation. This would be one very relevant here. And of course, when we compact soils, when they lose that soil structure, they lose their porosity, and that means they cannot now exchange. They cannot breathe, so oxygen cannot get down into those soils, CO2 cannot cycle back up, but also particularly water, rainfall. If we have compacted, sealed, tight soils, that water cannot infiltrate down into the soil, so it has to go horizontally across. And this is what then takes that soil erosion, takes nutrients and other pollutants into our waterways. So this would be one very relevant, but of course we've got all sorts of other types of soil degradation in terms of erosion, salinity, contamination, pH extremes, loss of fertility, loss of soil organic matter, these types of things. So it depends on the context of how we define that soil erosion. And soil degradation, sorry. And of course, it's a bit of a crazy thing when you think about it. This resource that we're all here particularly to talk about, this very, very precious resource that we are all intimately dependent on to eat, to feed, to function, very quickly this very precious resource can turn into a pollutant once it leaves the farm. Once that soil leaves the field, leaves the farm, enters the waterways. Here now, the very same precious resource can become a pollutant, increasing the nutrients. This is the nutrient enrichment of our aquatic ecosystems, causing, again, decline in the function and the quality of those ecosystems, carrying soil, sediments, carrying other pollutants, etc. So again, it's this fine line between that precious resource becoming a pollutant. And as a key factor, we have to keep soil where it is. It has to stay on farm as just the most basic and fundamental starting point. We have to keep soil on farm. If we're losing soil, we're of course undermining our very society, arguably. So then we have all of those discussions. It's like, yes, of course, we all need to eat, and we just need to strike that better balance between the importance of us and the importance of eating and feeding ourselves. Of course we do, but we just have to transition that thinking into the context of, well, of course, we have to do that within the wider context of the landscape and the ecological health. Farms, they function within landscapes, and if those landscapes are declining and degrading, well, then the farms are dependent on some of those other ecosystem services, etc., that come from the landscape as well. So it's just really about striking this better balance between producing food and also taking care of our landscapes and our ecology. And perhaps we just need a little bit of humility around that and acknowledge that, of course, we need to feed ourselves, but we have to do it in that more sustainable way. And really then key to that is this point about multifunctionality. We have a kind of traditional mindset in the top left-hand corner there, which is very production-focused. And again, fine, we need to eat. And this is kind of a nice example of that post-World War era where it was very production-focused. And yeah, that's good at providing us food and resources, fuel, fiber, etc., but not so well. The design of these kind of more intensive productive systems are not so good at providing some of those other ecosystem services. And if we look at the natural ecosystems, for example, on the bottom left, okay, they're very good at providing some of these ecosystem services, but generally maybe not as productive. So the transition needs to come towards the image on the right here, that we just need multifunctional landscapes, striking that better balance between productivity and care of the surrounding environment. And then, there are tools and strategies, and we're here to kind of talk about those and exchange those at events like this. Well, how do we create these multifunctional landscapes? How do we still maintain productivity, but also support some of these other ecosystem services? And there are a range of kind of discussions and strategies around how to do that. And, part of that could start with things like what we're here to talk about, some of the soil health principles, regenerative agriculture principles, which can at least start to, within the productive areas, start to manage those resources better, more effectively, more efficiently, minimizing soil losses, of course, as we have talked about, but also being more efficient with some of our inputs, minimizing some of the use of some of the more detrimental practices and inputs. And that's what's very interesting about the soil health principles. This idea of that word principle is that we talk about the principles are applicable to many different contexts. And that's why people all around the world are talking about these principles. Because, yeah, sure, how we apply them in North America and Australia and Europe and other parts of the world, yeah, sure, it may be different. The different scales, the different contexts there. We have to apply them in a different way. But nonetheless, there's good foundational principles in these ideas, and we have then those conversations about how best to translate that, how best to apply in all of those various different contexts. And of course, events, again, like this, we're all here to exchange ideas, farmers coming together, peer-to-peer learning. This is a big part of that discussion, and Anna, coming up next, is going to share some of her research about that. And that's why events like these are so critical to help farmers relate these principles and work out the practical nitty-gritties of really how to put this in action, where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So we have all sorts of aspects to the principles. There's really good reasons why we should minimize soil disturbance. It maintains the soil structure that we talked about just earlier, supporting better soil biological activity. It can be, those disturbances can diminish or disrupt some of those living parts of the soil. Diversity is the one I want to talk about quickly now and into the next slide. This is what's going to help to create multifunctionality, a diversity of plants, both productive and non-productive. And then these other principles, like keeping that soil covered. A lot of you would have heard about, we talk a lot about soil carbon and soil health these days, and keeping the soils covered with green plants, keeping photosynthesis turned on so that those green plants are capturing that sunlight energy, breathing in carbon, sending that carbon down to the soil to pump it down into the soil. This is a key important mechanism of maintaining soil quality, soil functionality, etc. And animals, they do livestock integration. You know, some farmers out there in the world are more purely just cropping, some are just livestock, and some are very mixed. And today we're also going to hear from 2 mixed farmers and their experience of implementing the practices and some of their mindset journeys. And so livestock can be a very valuable, it depends how we manage them. They like to receive a lot of bad press these days, of course, but it depends on how we manage them. Yes, livestock can degrade landscapes, but livestock can also restore landscapes. It just depends on how they are managed. And so they do bring a lot of benefits in terms of mixed systems. And if we look into nature, this idea of looking at natural landscapes, plants and animals always coexist. And maybe there's an important lesson for us to learn from natural systems as we redesign our productive systems towards that multifunctionality. This one I won't dwell on. I just wanted to point out when we talk about principles, it's not just about the practices, so to speak. It's also about what they achieve, so some of the outcomes. And this is just a slide that from an interesting study that has kind of summarized some of the differences between what the academic literature says and what practitioners say in terms of the most important principles or most widely used or talked about principles and the most widely used and talked about outcomes. And there are some interesting differences between these. For example, on the right-hand side in terms of outcomes, the one thing that kind of jumps out very interestingly is there about 4th or so down, to improve soil health. You can see that both practitioners and academics rate this one very highly. This has become very synonymous with particularly I think some of the regenerative principles, that they both really align that this is an important part of what it is trying to do to improve soil health, soil carbon. Improve biodiversity is another one that rates highly. But there's just some nuance and differences there between those 2 different groups, but I just want to point out, it's not just about following principles, it's also about achieving outcomes, and we have to kind of bring that more broadly into the discussion as well. And so with that means that we also need new mindsets, and that's going to be the other theme in which we're going to weave into our discussion today. Look, we've been doing things, we've been producing food in a certain way for the last many decades. It's, as I say, have brought a lot of positives and good things to that, but we just have to acknowledge that there has been another side to that as well. And therefore, we need some new ideas. We need to bring some change, some discussion into that picture in order to help the transition. Transitioning can be difficult for some people. It can be who are more risk averse. It can be bit of jumping off the cliff type of thing. So we need to then have these discussions about supporting farmers, not just at the principles, practices, the field level implementation, but also their mindsets in terms of how they manage that transition and what is it about them that sparks their interest and curiosity to kind of go down this pathway. We need some new thinking, and that's again why events like these are so valuable and important to stimulate and exchange ideas that we need some creative solutions for moving forward. So with that, I will pass on to my colleague here, Anna Krzywoszynska. I've been practicing that one.
All night.
I'm sure I didn't get it quite right, but I'm close. Anna Krzywoszynska. She's a wonderful social scientist from many of you will be familiar with her. She was at Sheffield University here, but she's unfortunately left us to go to the University of Oulu in Finland, in northern Finland. And she is a social scientist researching some of the peer-to-peer learning, farmer-oriented learning in this space. So I'll hand over to Anna, and she can tell you more about herself and her work. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, everyone. Great to be here. I think in my short talk, I'm going to build a little bit of a bridge between these big issues that Joel has highlighted, the fact that we're in deep trouble on a planetary scale, to the very local scale of this event and your work in the fields. So I'm an environmental social scientist. I study how we know nature and how it matters. And one of my primary research objects or research subjects in the last few years have been regenerative agriculture farmers. So many of you in this tent will have hosted me at their farms, thank you, and talked to me about your experiences. So I'm going to share a little bit about this with you today. So I have been really fascinated, really, how did we end up in this planetary boundaries overshoot, considering that soil fertility historically has always been at the heart of societies. Soil wasn't something that was external, that was an extra to social life. We didn't have to have concepts such as soil literacy or soil education. Soil and the maintenance of soil fertility was one of the basic foundations of social stability. So we had a lot of systems in place, from night manure to it was just integrated. We didn't even have to think about it. Food production and maintaining soil fertility, soil health were just part of what it meant to be a human being. And then we had a change, and this, I could talk a lot about this change and what caused it and the different facets, but the headline really is a shift in the understanding of soil fertility from something that comes from the soil and the processes in the soil to something that comes from a bag, that comes from chemicals. So this shift from understanding of fertility of something that is in the soil to something that is actually an outcome of a chemical balance, which we can improve, which we can, change, which we can intervene into. So here is our favorite scientist who is behind all of this, and now we are getting our fertility largely from the bag. What accompanied this shift is a change in mindset, also amongst, the emerging research class at that moment in the 18th century, 19th century, that soil is not really a resource. Soil is actually an obstacle, because if for the plant to be the healthiest that it can, all that it needs is to have this ideal balance of chemicals, then soil becomes an obstacle. It becomes something to overcome. It has problems, it has deficits, it has lacks that we need to act on. And how do we act on that? We act through machinery. We act through chemicals, we act through agrochemicals, we act through new cultivars. So with this change in perspective, we also see a rise in agricultural research and agricultural science. And the production of knowledge about what it means to have a healthy soil and what it means to do good farming no longer takes place in the field. It takes place increasingly in research institutes, in universities, and then in private companies. So this generation of knowledge, which is so important to the improvement of practice, stops to be in the hands of farmers. So this is our shift to the linear knowledge transfer. The scientists develop, or the researchers, also in private enterprises, develop the ideas, they develop the products, and then they inform the farmers. And this is, what we can still see today in many ways, and sometimes in violent ways. But if we step back from a moment and think, how do we actually, as human beings, produce knowledge? We produce knowledge in communities. If you are a dog breeder and you want to become a better dog breeder, you join the dog breeding association. If you're a singer and you want to become a better singer, you join other musicians. If you're a gardener, want to become a better gardener, again, you find an association. And this is the same thing that farmers have done previously, and then this was lost because of this rise in importance of research as something that is done by specialists. And it warms my heart, it makes me so happy every time that I come to Groundswell to see that this is coming back, and it's coming back strong. So I want to tell you a little bit about the experiences of the farmers that I have talked to and followed who have gone through the Regen Ag transition, right? So how do you go from being just a conventional farmer, you know, doing a good job, keeping your parents happy, fitting in with your community, to doing the shift, which is not just a shift in practice, it's a shift in identity. So I'm going to tell you a kind of couple of headliners from these experiences. And I have noticed that when people do the transition, they go through 3 different stages. So first of all, we have this seeking stage. And I think hopefully many of you in this tent and in the conference overall are in the seeking stage. So you're thinking there's something you want to improve, there's something you want to make better, maybe there's a particular issue that you just can't overcome through conventional means. This is often reoccurring in the interviews. So you're seeking, you're trying to find an answer, you're trying to find a new way. And this is often motivated not by environmental concerns, even though we talk about the environment a lot here, it's motivated by things that are quite pragmatic. Like, I can't put my tractor in the field when it is too wet. I can't pay for the inputs anymore. I can't deliver the protein percentage that I need to deliver with the methods that I'm using, whatever it may be. I'm in debt. And then something happens. You know, in the seeking stage, you'll see a lecture. Or maybe you'll go to a farm walk and you'll see something, and there will be this light bulb moment. This is the way that it was consistently described in the interviews. The realization that something can be different, but I can take agency back. I can start making other kinds of decisions for myself in my farm. And then we start to experiment. And the experimentation is really the hardest moment. Because on the one hand, this is the moment when you put yourself as a farmer at risk. You're doing something new, you're trying something out. But this is also the moment when you let everybody else around you know that you are changing. So you're no longer part of the community that you were part of. Your fields are starting to look different. You're starting to come to different farming events. You're starting to grow different kinds of crops. And all of your neighbors can see it, and all of your family members can see it, and people start asking questions. And this really is the moment when people feel quite vulnerable. They feel quite alienated, and they really need, and we should provide them with a lot of support at this stage to reassure them that the risks are worth it, to give them, such as with Wild Farmed, to give them some sort of a security for this transition moment, but mainly to support them psychologically in a community way, telling them that yes, you're not alone, you're doing something that other people are also trying, keep trying. And so many people at this stage then join a WhatsApp group, start following the farming forum, or come to Groundswell, or join an association, because we have this massive psychological importance of being part of a community and seeing that what you're doing has some sort of a shared value, that other people are also of the same mind and they think that what you're doing is valuable. So the importance of community, as Joel was already saying, really is key. And this could be as easy as listening to a podcast about Regen Ag, or watching YouTube videos from other people, just to remind yourself, oh yeah, others are doing this too, I'm not alone. And then once you've experimented, you start to contribute, you start to come to panels, and you want to share your knowledge, and you have all of this information. And at this stage, I was asking people, okay, you know, scientists are doing a lot of research too, right? Where they are doing field trials, they are trying to find certain things out. How can science contribute to this moment? How can it, what kind of information, what kind of form of input is useful for Regen Ag farmers from the scientific research world? And what I was told is that, you know, it was very interesting. On the one hand, we still have this idea that science somehow has an inherent authority. That evidence that is produced in the laboratory is more powerful than evidence produced in the field. And I could give you a whole course on why that's not necessarily the case, but I won't. But please come and talk to me later. But let's say that, you know, in our culture, science has this authority. Scientists have this authority. That's probably why I'm standing here. So thank you. But for the Regen Ag community, this authority can be used as an asset. So we see Regen Ag specialists quoting scientists, and what is really nice now is that scientists are starting to come here and not lecture, but have conversations. And what is even better is that scientists are starting to actually design research projects that ask the kind of questions that the Regen Ag community wants answered. So rather than answering questions from within sciences, which is what we're really good at, starting to ask research questions from the field, which is what is necessary. So this step towards farmers setting the research agenda for environmental and agronomic sciences is something that I'm very invested in, personally and professionally. And I'll just finish my talk by telling you a little bit about what is going on. We are seeing a desire, and we need to see more confidence from the Regen Ag community to say, we want to be at the wheel of the research programs. We want to set the research agenda. We want to tell you what is important. And not just what research questions are important, but what forms of evidence are good. Because very often, scientists, we design these very, very elaborate protocols because we want to produce the kind of data that we can publish because it's important for our livelihoods, for our careers. But that's not necessarily the kind of evidence that you need, that a farmer needs. There is a concept of good enough evidence. So it would be really good for the Regen Ag community to start having a conversation about what is a good enough evidence. What kind of evidence, what kind of stories, what kind of data forms are important to you as you're trying to grow and learn. So for me, caring for soils starts with caring for farmers. And researching soils, researching soil health, means researching soil health as it is being enacted by the people who do this work. And just to finish, there are some really nice trends that I can see on the European level, which is kind of where I'm operating now out of the UK. There is this concept of living labs and lighthouses, which is now being embraced by a lot of funders, and that is a really big opportunity for the Regen Ag community and other farming communities to participate in research in a more powerful way, because the living lab is all about experimentation and learning in the field with a specific group of people. So I could talk a lot about this. Please come and ask me about this. Okay, please find me and ask me, how do I become a lighthouse or a living lab? And I'll tell you a little bit more. It's best to be already a group of people that can come together to join a research project. And there are nice things happening also. I would like to point out beyond Groundswell now in other places in Europe. There was the great conference Northern Roots, which was sort of the northern Groundswell for the Nordics. The 4 the 4 parts per 1,000 is also having a lot of conferences. So you can really see that the movement is growing, and it's your chance. Don't let corporations, don't let universities take control of this moment. This moment is for you. Thank you.
Very powerful. Thank you, Anna. Great message for this conference. So now let's hear from 2 farmers, 2 practitioners working at the field level and implementing this. And we'll hear their stories a little bit about how they approach some of the science practice and some of their mindset journeys. So first up, we have George Hosier. He is a mixed farmer from Wiltshire. He farms 1,500 hectares of mixed arable, cereals, etc., as well as some grass-fed beef. So George, looking forward to hearing your story. Tell us more about yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel, and inspiring, Anna. Thank you. So I was asked to talk about why we made the big paradigm shift that we did 10 years ago. Bit tricky to go back 10 years in your mind and understand why we made the changes we did. But really we need a bit of context to where I was at the time, and why there was a need for change. And to be honest, I didn't think there was a need for change. When I first set out, all I was looking for was a new seed drill. And here I am today. A very different farmer to what I was in 2013. I was sitting, Anna spoke about the seeking stage, that sort of light bulb moment. I was sitting on a tractor at 3 o'clock in the morning, power harrowing, 70-acre field, and the wonders of GPS, I was scrolling through Twitter, and I came across a clip of Jake Freestone in a field of 4-foot-high flowering mustard, drilling winter wheat. And that sort of piqued my interest. What on earth am I doing sitting on a tractor in the middle of the night, trying to beat soil into submission when actually it's possible just to go straight in? I mean, no-till hadn't come on my radar at all at this stage. I wasn't sort of looking to make that bigger change, but that just got me, that sort of piqued my interest, that got me thinking. I then stuck my head down a very deep rabbit hole that is soil health, and I haven't yet come up for air 10 years later. I started looking a bit more critically at what we were doing, and you know, there's a list there of some of the things that I sort of thought were wrong with our system. You know, we were getting more problems with blackgrass and other weeds. We were spending an awful lot of money on establishing our crops. Our min-till, as we thought, was not very minimal because our seed drill couldn't cope with the trash. So that sort of led me to think more critically. And so I then went back a bit further. And 1920, my great-grandfather bought Wexcombe, where we farm today. And over half of the land that he bought had been abandoned. I mean, it'd be really cool these days, it'd call rewilding. But it had been abandoned in the 1880s because it was marginal, unproductive land. He'd seen the potential in it, and he'd built the fertility up by putting cattle on there. He invented a mobile milking parlour. He moved the cattle around the farm, put a lot of bag nitrogen on, not something we encourage today, but he built the soil fertility up to enable him to then move back into an arable rotation. And over 90% of that ground hadn't seen any livestock on it some of it hadn't seen any livestock in my lifetime, and we'd had a dairy until 1990. So since 1990 until 2013, the majority of our land hadn't seen any livestock on it. And so that sort of comes, the livestock comes a bit later because I was, as I said earlier, looking for a drill, but it was more a change of system. So we had that eureka, that light bulb moment on YouTube. I then trialed a few drills, and we ordered the drill in 2014, June of 2014. And in September 2014, we had the Alexanders who built our cross slot. They came with their drill and drilled half of our wheat acreage, and we drilled the other half with our conventional system, which was 3 or 4 passes with a cultivator and then with our springtime drill. We then had about 60, 70 mil of rain on the night of the 18th of September, 3 days after drilling. And we had on these 2 pictures, the hedge that you can see is the dividing line between the 2 fields. On the left is a field that we'd drilled in our conventional system. On the right had been direct drilled. We lost up to a foot of soil in the left-hand field, particularly on the headland where we'd been going up and down, but even where we'd been going across the contours, we still lost a lot of soil. The direct drill field, nothing had moved. Even the rape helm was still sitting on the surface. And that just, for me, that vindicated my decision to go down this route. But as I said, it sent me down this rabbit warren of discovery of soil health. And, you know, it wasn't just farming books that I read. I think the One Straw Revolution was a big trigger for me, but probably the biggest one was The Hidden Half of Nature by David Montgomery and Anna Beakley. Just to understand all that biology and the microbiome of the soil and how similar it is to the microbiome in our gut and equally in the rumen of livestock. And that led me to think that we had to get cattle into the system. And so initially, because we'd reduced our cattle numbers significantly between 1990 and 2010, so we started growing cover crops in front of all our spring cropping, and we'd lightly go over and graze with the cattle. And as we've slowly been growing the herb, we've been planting more herbal lays in the rotation and getting diversity into the system through the introduction of the herbal lays and the cover crops. The shared experiences, this has been absolutely invaluable to what all the changes we've made. Very initially, cross-slot, there were about 20 of us who were all starting out at a similar time. We had a WhatsApp group. We used to have farm visits regularly. Pasture for Life on the livestock side, you know, the forums, absolutely incredible. I've learned so much from everyone over the years. And latterly with Wild Farmed, the grower group on that, again on WhatsApp and farm visits, with just that interconnection with other farmers doing similar things has been amazing. And this place here, I mean, you know, what can we say? We've all benefited from coming up here once a year for the last 8-9 years. It's brilliant. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, George. Okay. Thank you, George. You can find George on social media. He's known as Farming Fred. And next we have Ed Horton, who I would also highly recommend his Instagram account. He has some very engaging content on there. You'll find him as well. He farms 5,500 hectares, primarily in Gloucestershire and a little bit around there. He's also a mixed farmer of producing arable and grass-fed beef and sheep, and a little bit of agroforestry as well. So thank you, Ed. Take it away.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Anna and George, for such a high bar to aim for now, having set us off this morning. Good morning, everyone. Some of you I have probably spoken to before, and I do apologise if some of this is a repeat of what I've said before, but I'm like a broken record occasionally. So, a little bit about us before I start. I am a farmer through and through, family farming partnership with my father. We're based across the southwest of England, so we farm from Cotswold Brash, just outside Cirencester, to beautiful chalk downland that makes my job look really easy, and a whole load of rubbish in between. We are a traditional, proper, my father would call it, mixed farm. We have indoor pig finishing unit, large flock of sheep, my father's pride and joy, his pedigree beef, shorthorn cattle, which I will get told of if I don't mention the breed. Fantastic heifers for sale if anyone is in need of some very good regen cows. We also have a joint venture forestry unit and then a whole load of niche crops, some of which I will rattle through now. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the agronomy side of life and some of the financials as to where our regen journey has taken us. Ours is very specific to us, as is everyone's regen journey. There is no hard and fast rule that everyone must stick to become a regen farmer. I actually call our system a hybrid system. We steal every good idea I can find from conventional and organic and amalgamate them together. And we sit somewhere in the hinterland between the two. We are not organic, and yet I'm not fully conventional. I'm somewhere in the lovely grey middle area. On the slide there are some of the things and the ethos, the main ethos that I try and run our farming system through. Obviously, a huge focus on soil health, as has been pointed out by far more experienced people than me in the world of soil health. It is the most singularly important thing that we have at our disposal as a resource and as an asset. And if we don't treat it correctly, we are going to lose touch with it. Livestock integration is key in our system in removing our inputs and removing our reliance on artificial inputs. Water quality comes hand in hand with soil health. As Joel pointed out, soil can go very quickly from being a resource to being a pollutant if you get it wrong. And water quality in our part of the world, we're surrounded by limestone streams with very niche habitats in them and sit on top of a massive water table, very porous limestone rock. That water quality is very important, not just to us as farmers, but also to consumers out there. Biodiversity is key in our system. Without biodiversity, I cannot get away with the way in which I run my system. I need nature to work with me, to do half my job for me. I cannot control pests and insects without the use of insecticides if I don't have biodiversity. And the last two, nutritionally dense food and linking that to the consumer, is the final stage that I feel sometimes we miss. We're all very good at talking to ourselves about how good we are, what we do in the world of farming. Very rarely do we seem to be able to get a consumer to engage with that. So part of my job is to try and do that. I will skip through this very quickly because George has talked about his much better direct drilling than me. He's got a far swankier drill than I have. But on a soil health and soil quality side of life, direct drilling is part of our system, but it's not the whole hog. I am slightly different to George, and that is the great thing about regen farming. I still own a plough. And no one's throwing something at me, so that's good. I still own a plough. We still use it. It's still key part of our system occasionally. The correct tool in the correct situation is very important. Being blindly driven by an idea that you don't fully understand can be quite a dangerous place to be. So when we're looking at that sort of soil health side of life, what do we do apart from direct drilling to try and keep it alive? Constant root engagement. It's spoken about a lot, and here is a very brief set of slides to show how we fit an autumn catch crop into our system. So, Top right-hand picture, cover crop sown after a crop of milling wheat. This is a field this growing year. Unfortunately, I didn't get time to put the current slide up of next crop in here. But cover crop planted straight after harvest of milling wheat. So that's a cover crop of mustard, phacelia, and fodder radish. Cheap, cheerful. We grow all the seed ourselves. Slotted straight in. Grazed off by a mob of about 800 lambs throughout October. So we've provided food for sheep, we've provided food for the soil in the form of roots, and we've provided food for biodiversity in the form of 3 flowering species throughout the later summer period. Direct drilled with a crop of winter spelt. Handily, this ticks the box for my niche cropping, nutritionally dense food for a local market. Our spelt is an ancient grain, goes to a local flour mill. The second photo along the bottom, that was taken in January. So drilled in October in a fairly dodgy autumn. As we all remember, it never stopped raining, but the cover crop has allowed us to travel. Come December, it looks a bit messy. You have to accept the unaesthetic occasionally with regen farming. It can't all be perfect and look aesthetically wonderful. On the surface, didn't look like much. The next slide is when I dug a hole. And that is a key indication of the kind of soil that we are managing to build on the Cotswolds. Inherently, we have rubbish soil. It's clay mixed with some slightly porous rock. People think it's boys' land. It's not. It's pretty tough stuff to try and farm and to try and produce crops on. That slide there is I didn't place that worm. It did happen to come out of the ground very handily at the right time as I knelt down with my camera in the middle of a field. But you can see we have last year's wheat stubble and the previous autumn's companion cover crop detritus still upright on the surface. Their roots are still intact, creating natural drainage fissures. We have a brilliant soil structure. For I think it was mid-December or just before Christmas, it had rained a lot. I can still dig a hole and have soil structure like that, thanks to 10 years worth of our system working on this land. And the far slide shows the depth of rooting that we can get out of direct drilled cereal plants. So that is, spelt is a slightly weird one. It will produce huge roots. It's an ancient grain. It quite likes doing that. It's part of its resilient strategy is to produce massively dense, deep roots. When it comes to looking at soil health, other parts of a system also have, in some cases, actually a bigger effect on the health of soil than tillage. And herbicides and fungicides are 2 of those things that have actually a much bigger unforeseen impact on soil health. Part of our system has been to remove the use of herbicides. Not entirely, I'm not that good, and I'm not organic. And so therefore I have the choice of using herbicides where I need to, but they are my last port of call. What is actually our first port of call has been our investment in mechanical weeders. So we run 2 camera-guided hoes, which now very handily the SFI is going to encourage me to use more. But our inter-row camera-guided hoes, there is no resistance to a mechanical weeder. If those pull weeds out onto the surface and it's dry for 24 hours, those weeds are dead. It's not quite the same when you come to maybe applying Atlantis that has some fairly ropey results these days thanks to herbicide resistance. This is also far more targeted. If you're going out with a sprayer, as an agronomist myself, if you find something you want to deal with in a chunk of a field, your inherent sort of jump to is, we'll just do the whole field because the sprayer's going out there anyway, and what's another 20 minutes? With the hoe, when I'm crop walking, I can create online maps on our system. I can send them straight to the operator's tractor, and he therefore has a crop walked map of exactly where he needs to hoe. So we are far more specific with this. And you can see the 2 pictures on the bottom left. That was spring 2021, after a fairly miserable autumn planting in 2020. So on the left is about the 1st of April, and on the right is that crop just as flag leaf emerges. Taken in exactly the same spot. I am occasionally quite good at standing in the same place and taking photos, to show that actually, yeah, with 0 herbicide in a direct drill system where we can control our weed seed burden by keeping it on the surface and germinating it when I want to, a pass with a hoe can create incredibly clean crops without the use of herbicides. Now, livestock integration is talked about a lot when it comes to regen farming, and a lot of people can struggle on this front. I am incredibly lucky in the fact that we are a mixed farm. I never thought I'd say that. I used to think that livestock were rather irritating and got in the way and took up space that I could be growing cereal crops on. But our sheep are now our biggest asset to our arable farm. And I say that without any sarcasm. Without sheep, I could not farm in the way that we do, and I could not remove things from our system in the way I do. So it's a very traditional method. The Cotswold sheep is known as the golden hoof of the Cotswolds. Without them, nothing actually ever really grew before the invention of artificial N. And with the invention of artificial N and fungicides, sheep dropped out of fashion. Wool was not worth as much as it used to be. You could cover a lot more ground with a sprayer in a day than you can with a flock of sheep. And we had maybe lost that inherent knowledge of how livestock can integrate with cereal growers, cereal crops, and how you can manage them. We have gone back to that very traditional system by using sheep as our fungicides and growth regulators. So this is a crop of triticale, one of the many crops we grow. We grow 18 different combinables across the farm, going back to that diversity aspect of regen farming. This is a crop of winter-sown triticale for seed. So the picture on the bottom right is what we can make our crops look like. So when we're looking at disease control, we're looking at removing upwards of 95% of green area and taking that disease out of the field with a sheep. Not only has that removed that latent infection that I'd inherently have put a fungicide on, it's also fattened a lamb at a time of year when I'd have to instead have them on a specifically purpose-grown fodder crop. So not only are they doing my arable crops a favour, they're also getting fat off it and increasing their output. And when you look at then on a yield front, from a calorific output point, putting livestock into a field and a system, we may be dropping our arable yields ever so slightly in our system, but we're increasing our calorific output. And when it boils down to it, as a farmer, producing food is where I am, not just producing yield, because yield is wonderful when you're standing with 5 other farmers in the pub on a wet Friday afternoon in August. No one else cares about yield. What they care about is food. So those sheep have dealt with my disease for me. The pictures on the left show the difference. We always, in every year, I will keep ungrazed trial strips in blocks of ground to make sure that actually we are getting the output that I want from it. That picture on the left shows the difference. Those two plants are taken from the picture next to them. They are taken about 3 strides apart. The plant on the left is from the ungrazed trial. So admittedly, it's in a no fungicide system, but at grain fill, we have 1.5 flag leaves left on a 3-tillered plant. Quite literally 5 meters away from it, where we'd grazed sheep, and it still had no fungicide, we've got double the tillers, and I have a full spectrum of green leaf. That plant, then at the bottom, if you can see underneath the picture of the sheep, the outcome, that's actually the important bit, and the really important bit is the gross margin when it comes to us as farmers. It's all well and good us having great ideas, but at the end of the day, I am a commercial business. I actually need to make this pay. If this didn't pay, I'm not here to do it anymore. And that's sometimes the bit that people don't like to talk about. I'm always very happy to point out, actually, we are a big commercial operation. I have to make this pay. This isn't something that I get to play with and make it look nice and fluffy around the edges. There is a large team of staff at home that all need their wages paying. I would like to pay myself a wage, that we have to make this work. And the difference in gross margin, so when you look at the difference in output, the extra yield we gain, and the reduction in input costs that we get, our gross margins have increased from 880 quid a hectare for that crop of triticale to over 1,200 quid a hectare. That's not just a small incremental win. That is quite a substantial gain, gross margin per hectare wise. Looking at that in more detail, I'm not sure how well this slide shows up. Oh, it's quite good over there. So, very quickly, because I'm aware that I'm running out of time. This is 2 sets of 2 crops from a contract farm. The green column is the inputs and outputs under our current system. Orange is what it would have been under a traditional conventional system. So yields and sale price are put in at the same, but when you boil it down to it, the gross margin difference between our current system, so removing artificial inputs, increasing the use of livestock, so putting an output from the livestock in there as well, our gross margin difference on a crop of winter rape is nearly £340 a hectare.
Maybe just one question.
That's quite a substantial difference. You know, it's effectively right now another ton a hectare of yield that you can get in our system. With wheat, we're looking at virtually this, if not that's slightly more, in an increase in gross margin. And we're looking at sort of the bigger picture numbers. So this is on a 464 hectare farm, one of my clients. The increase on average has replaced his BPS check. That is entirely what this system was designed to do. It was designed to allow us to farm profitably without the use of BPS, as that was being removed from us. The great thing is we can do that whilst improving biodiversity, water quality, soil health, and producing nutritionally dense food. And the final bit is the biodiversity aspect of life. Encompassing all of our farming is a massive mid-tier scheme. We've been HLS, ELS, mid-tier. I've got 4 active SFI agreements at the moment. I need that biodiversity to work for me. They are my predators when it comes to dealing with aphids, to dealing with flea beetles, to dealing with slugs. So biodiversity is also a key part of what we do as a farm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thank you so much to our wonderful panel. I'm mindful we are a little bit tight on time. I'm wondering if anyone out there has a fantastic question that could be applied, we could ask to all the panel. Nothing maybe too specific. Has anyone got a bit of a nice universal question that maybe we could hear? Just a quick closing comment from our panel.
I don't know if it's...
There's a microphone here.
I don't know if it's universal. I'm an organic mixed farmer in a slightly smaller way to Ed, or quite a bit smaller. And it appears like you're growing cover crops and drilling straight in without chemicals. Yeah, that's what I'm interested in. You know, what would you recommend I started as a cover crop? What?
Something simple and easy to kill. So that's why we use fodder radish, mustard, and phacelia. They're 3 things that are very easy to kill, either with grazing or with drilling, or they're non-frost tolerant. So they're 3 cheap, cheerful crops that we can very easily remove from the field without the use of glyphosate. Fodder radish, mustard, and phacelia.
Okay, I'm mindful of our time. So up next, folks, is the rainfall simulator, which will be outside. Myself and Odette Menard will be out there doing a demonstration for those of you that would like to come and have a look there. Otherwise, perhaps our 3 panelists will linger around here. If anyone has some questions for them, please come up and say hello. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the panelists.